Asher, quick question for you. For the Q&A portion, will people be like raising hands and like talking through the questions, or putting them in the chat? And if it's chat, how do you want to go about it?
Yeah, so my vote is, and it's good that we're asking this now because the audience can hear it then. Put your Q&A in the Q&A. There's a little Q&A bubble on your Zoom, I guess, bar, the bottom bar, or wherever you may have it on your screen. Feel free to ask your questions there, and we'll answer them live. If you guys want to be live dangerously, you can have live questions, but there's pros and cons to that. But the Q&A, feel free to ask questions there. We'll get to them. We will try our best to get to them as long as they're reasonable.
Great.
I think we're good to get started whenever you guys are ready, just so you know.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Asher. Then I'll kick it off. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Kirby. I'm the head of sales here at Accrete, and we're very excited to show you that the progress that we've made so far in Argus Social Intel, our intelligence platform that can be leveraged for a variety of different defense cases, as well as commercial use cases as well. So we're interested in your questions and your interest at the end, and you'll be able to reach out and contact us following this call for additional information. And next slide. Okay, so I'll give a bit of background on our company, Accrete, and then we'll introduce Argus Social to you all. So discuss the problems that it addresses and its functionality, the capabilities that it has and it will have in the future. Then Dan Kerwin, our product manager, is going to be on to demonstrate the platform and the work that we have coming up for Q3 and Q4 that we're very excited about. And then we'll take on some additional questions from the audience and then wrap things up. So I expect we'll complete this call in 60 minutes or less. Next slide. So a bit of background on our company. We're based out of Manhattan, and we also have offices in Alexandria, Virginia, for federal sales, as well as our research hub, which is located in Boston. The reason the company started in Manhattan is we initially focused on financial use cases, the markets, et cetera. And then we expanded into e-commerce and media and entertainment. What we saw with media and entertainment was we developed a social media platform for one of the top 3 record labels in the world to identify up and coming music artists by reading the sentiment in the commentary and evaluating the commentary for the quality and uniqueness of it, and making predictive analytics about the likely commercialization of that artist. So these are amateur artists that were posting their music on social media, and that platform is still has been very successful and is still in use today. So we've now sought to leverage that for defense use cases as well. So in about 2019, we entered into defense work and developed a supply chain intelligence platform that was through the Defense Innovation Unit, and then it was subsequently entered into licensing within the DoD as of last year, and has been very successful in identifying linkages between, say, U.S. vendors that have influenced by the Chinese on their supply chain, and allowing the DoD to be able to address that preemptively. So with that, since we built out the social media platform on the commercial side, we've now transitioned to defense use cases. So Argus Social, as you see on the upcoming slide, I will hand it over and to Dan Kerwin to give us an additional overview of the platform, and I'll take it from here. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Jason. Very excited to be here introducing you all to Argus Social. We really think that this is going to be kind of a revolutionary and pioneering way to understand publicly available information. So if Maggie, you could go to the next slide, we'll give just a briefer introduction. What Argus Social is attempting to do and is doing effectively is finding deeper and more predictive insights from social chatter and other publicly available information. We're using our AI agents to take what you as a user or as an expert know about your domain, your field, your interests, learn from that, go out and find the key voices and the influencers to identify their narratives and what they're discussing in greater depth. What this allows us to do is, with minimal fine tuning from the user, we're able to provide contextual understanding and insights that predict not only where narratives are going, but who may spread them and who may be affected by them, to give the analyst a deeper understanding of how network and narrative intelligence can evolve to assess misdis, malinformation, as well as other information operations. If you go to the next slide. So sort of alluded to, but one of the biggest issues that we see sort of at the forefront right now is just the proliferation of data in the global ecosystem online. And a lot of that is social media data. That social media data proliferation is being taken advantage of by our adversaries to push misdis and malinformation to sway not just our elections, but elections globally, to sway the narratives and radicalize and sow discord amongst various populations. So what we want to do is we want to address this issue by providing users the ability to get ahead of these narratives, identify counter narratives that are going to most effectively stop the propagation of those misdis and malinformation narratives, and really aim to aid democratic institutions worldwide to prevent the stem of this radicalization and this discord. Behind the tool are dual use technologies at their core. So as Jason sort of mentioned previously, this is all born out of technology that we've deployed in the financial industry and the entertainment industry. We've been able to work to identify ways to get to difficult to get to data, make sense of it, and identify predictive insights from it. For example, with this product that we provided for a top 3 record label, we were able to provide, we were able to predict the streams of a TikTok artist before she went viral in December. She was signed by the time she had gone viral by our customer. And ultimately that leads them to have a more positive outcome versus their competitors. Ultimately, we want to take those types of technologies and provide them into a defense use case. Social media, as we mentioned, is very, very dispersed, very wide, and it's difficult to really capture the entire universe there. So rather than trying to do that, what we focus on are network analytics, using that seed of information that the user can provide, letting our AI learn from that and go out and be a force multiplier for you. It's a force multiplier, not just in the scope that it can get, but also in its sort of temporal bounds. It never stops working. It's on 24/7, always collecting and analyzing these data and providing you that narrative intelligence over time to show you how the stories are evolving, who is spreading them, who holds the influence, and what you need to be paying attention to most. Some of the use cases that we have identified, these all focus around misdis and malinformation, but that's kind of for the defense space. You generally can map and track these networks of interest using that seed, whether you seed it with content or with accounts that you're already tracking for a certain topic. It'll go out and find those insights at scale by looking at how information spreads. Sort of core to our product is the idea that it's as important to understand where an account gets their information from as it is to understand who they spread it to. So we build our networks around that at scale and at speed, or at scale and at a speed that is beyond human capacity and traditional software capacity as well. Additionally, with the sort of more narrowed scope of what we're collecting, rather than trying to boil the ocean, we focus on this network. It allows us to leverage narrative intelligence to identify the key viral topics that are being discussed within a network, how they're evolving over time, what the key points, salient details are. And ultimately that leads into number 3, which allows the user to counter misinformation, disinformation, and IO campaigns more broadly. If you understand what the narrative is before it goes viral or as it's gaining traction, you can better identify a response before it has time to stick within a network. And that's sort of core to the premise as well. Once you have these networks built out, they continuously grow and learn and identify new voices and new narratives. So you're taking those known knowns that you had and turning them into an identification tool for those unknown unknowns. So these narratives, these networks can persist for years at a time. And one of the examples that we'll show you is around a use case for misinformation spreading. While we didn't have it in place prior, what we've been able to do is build a network that we can now monitor on a go-forward approach to identify new misinformation narratives before they've had a chance to gain any traction. Jason, I'll turn it back over to you briefly to go over what's on this slide.
You bet, Dan. So just in terms of the contract vehicles that we currently have available, like I mentioned, we've done work with the Defense Innovation Unit previously. So that is a contract channel that can be leveraged by defense purchasers to be able to use ideally like an OTA type contract for this capability. And then additionally, through the CDAO and Tradewin, that is pending, but we're expecting completion of access to that contract vehicle very shortly. And for Softops, that's through our partner with CACI, and that would be for government purchasers within the Special Operations Enterprise. Same as NSIN, that's going to be accessible for any DoD user through our partner Huntington Ingalls. And then lastly, the Naval Information Warfare Center Atlantic contract vehicle that you see there, available for buyers within the Department of the Navy. So what we're going to be showing you here today is the capability that we built so far, a lot of tremendous capacity, and we're interested in having conversations with you all about trying out the platform and getting your feedback on it. And we're still continuing to build out the analytical capabilities, which is really our strong point. So we're looking for partners for transitions to phase 2s, et cetera, as well. So I just wanted to cover that briefly, and then Dan, I'll hand it back to you to dive right into the demo.
Awesome. So Maggie, I'm going to steal the screen from you if you can stop sharing briefly. Please let me know when you can all see that.
Looks good.
Awesome. So as the name says up on the top left, we built a network around the misinformation narrative that spread about 2 months ago now, on the 22nd of May, that was centered around a false image that purported to show an explosion at the Pentagon. It was circulated with a very similar caption, said breaking news, explosion at the Pentagon. Even had those lightning bolt emojis to try and drum up the interest. What ultimately happened is, as that image went viral, it caused US equities to sell off pretty rapidly around 10 a.m. Very quickly, they recovered when people looked at that image and said, that looks nothing like the Pentagon. But the damage had sort of been done at that end. The conversation shifted that day to be about the dangers of generative AI and how government leaders and business leaders need to be acting responsibly to manage those risks. So we wanted to see kind of who purported to spread that information, and if we could ascertain the why they would have put that information into the ether. And so what we did, proxying for what would be expert knowledge in the analyst's hands, was we went back in time and we looked for the accounts that first spread that false image with the caption that circulated virally, and we found that about 14 accounts between 8:45 a.m. and 10:03 a.m., which was when Russian state news RT picked up the tweet, shared the information, and it sort of went viral in more traditional media circles. Around 8:45, I mentioned that's when we first see the indications of the tweet kind of picking up traction. Anecdotally, we think it made a species jump from a Facebook group onto Twitter, which is where it ultimately gained its traction. Between 9:15 and 10:03, another 11 accounts, give or take, shared that information. 6 of them shared it within quick succession between 9:57 and 9:59 a.m. So we used those 14 accounts as the seed of the network. Essentially, what we said is these are kind of our ground truth. We know these to be relatively suspicious in that they shared this. We want to understand where they're getting their information from. So we want to know, who do they follow? Who do they all mutually follow? And what were they saying for the previous few weeks? Went out and built that network, and if not entirely surprising, it was very interesting. What we were able to ascertain was this network was composed of either official Kremlin spokespeople accounts or accounts that were sort of widely connected or sharing Kremlin sympathetic narratives. So for example, RT is one of the most connected nodes within this network, with multiple people following RT to get information. We also see, if we search, that TASS shows up, albeit slightly less well connected, as does Dmitry Medvedev. We can go through and continue doing this, Dmitry Medvedev being very central to this network. But ultimately, what we find is that many of these accounts were, again, sharing these sort of Kremlin sympathetic or direct Kremlin talking points. So for example, this account, RevMaxing, was sharing a known Kremlin talking point around based around undermining US support financially for Ukraine. The tweet says, "This is the water in Mississippi, 100 billion for Ukraine, nothing for Americans." If you follow that tweet link, essentially you see dirty water in Mississippi. RevMaxing also posts anti-NATO rhetoric. If we were to dig into more of these, what we would find is that we see conspiracy theories around the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, accusing the United States of being behind that explosion. We see a lot of references to Bakhmut and patriotic victory in Bakhmut by the Russian forces. So we sort of established that this network is, at the very least, again, sympathetic towards the Russian position in Ukraine. Specifically, the narratives that NATO expansion east justified the invasion of Ukraine, as well as the narrative around denazifying Ukraine. And so what we can take a look at is, on the 22nd, what were the key narratives that were circulating within the network? On the top right here, we see what we're calling a semantic gravity map. What essentially this shows us is the frequency and similarity of posts about a viral narrative. A dense cluster like this indicates that there is a lot of chatter about a topic, and the language is not terribly differentiated, which we call an indicator of the possible misdis or malinformation campaign. Essentially, lack of difference in the language, or the greater the similarity of the language, the greater the frequency, the more negative the sentiment, the more likely it is to be misdis or malinformation. And so if we sort of home in on this cluster, what we see is that the narrative is around tension and violence escalating in the Belgrade region. One of the things that our initial kind of timeline left out between 9 and 10 a.m. is that there was another event occurring the morning of the 22nd. Around 5 a.m. Eastern time, we got word, or on social media, it started to circulate that Russian Legion forces, which are ethnic Russian fighters fighting on behalf of Ukraine against Russia, had begun an incursion into the Belgorod region of Russia. By all accounts, they faced very little opposition and were able to make considerable progress into Russia. By around 9 a.m., reports surfaced of fighting in Graveron, which allegedly had a Russian base that housed tactical nuclear weapons. And so if we put this content together, or these timelines together, what we were able to essentially assess was that this network was activated on the morning of the 22nd Eastern time to push a narrative that may or may not, but hopefully would distract the rest of the world from what was, by all accounts, a relatively embarrassing military moment for Russia in Russia. We can also look at some of the other narratives that circulate to assess this level of the narratives that are circulating within the network. I'm sorry, the sort of sympathies of the network. Let's take a second to load. One of them that pops up is this Russian missile strike targets Patriot air defense system in Kyiv. One of the primary narratives within the network, or within networks outside of this network rather, leading up to this point, were that the big bad hypersonic Kinzhal missile was actually not really any sort of match for the US Patriot system. It was able to shoot down that missile fairly easily, which was of great embarrassment to the Russian military industrial complex. And so the network again activates to sort of counter that narrative and say, on the contrary, the Kinzhal missile was able to destroy a Patriot missile battery in Kyiv. And the maker of the Patriot battery, their shares are losing value in the market because they were beaten by Russian technology. What we can see here is the evolution of that narrative, right? They're finding the decoy rocket in the region to distract the enemy's air defense, where the missiles for the Patriot air defense system were actually destroyed in an earlier attack. The Kinzhal missiles used the radar signal to destroy it, and then ultimately, right, the Patriot air defense system was destroyed. And what we see looking at the overall metrics up here, this authenticity metric, again, sort of a proxy for what we would call genuine organic conversation about it, dips pretty substantially the 13th, 14th, and 15th, another sign to us that this is some sort of information operation or a coordinated campaign around a topic. And coincidentally, that's right around the time that percentage of the network is discussing this actually sort of picks up. So at the end of the day, I sort of mentioned we weren't able to identify that this misinformation narrative was going to go viral before it happened because we hadn't built this network. But what we have now is a network that does have these Kremlin sympathetic leanings that we can monitor on a continuous basis. It updates in near real time if we were to extend the date forward, and it allows users to identify those narratives and those talking points that the Kremlin is trying to push earlier so that the analyst is more able to address them preemptively before they gain traction outside of the network. So I'll pause there on the demo. We can slide it back over to the slides. Jason, were you covering the go forward here, or am I?
This is you, Dan.
Cool. So over the next few months, we have a lot of very exciting content and features coming into the platform. What I just showed you on the user interface was built purely around Twitter, but that was really just our POC. What we're doing is we're bringing in TikTok and Instagram and Reddit and Weibo and Telegram all in the next quarter, followed by YouTube and Facebook and VK. The ability for you as the user to bring data, whether in CSV form, an S3 bucket, any sort of integration, whether you've purchased it or collected it yourself. And then we're going to expand it to other PAI, including news data, to kind of give you your one-stop shop for narrative intelligence, network analysis around the information environment. We're coupling this with a few very interesting features. So by the end of next week, actually, we're going to have our MVP of a chat agent, which essentially will sit on top of all of the networks you've built, allowing you to reference not just the data and the content within network A, but compare network A to network B. So if you have radicalization in Sudan and an Al-Shabaab network elsewhere monitoring both of those for the chatter, you could ask the agent, what are the narratives that overlap between them? Who are the influential accounts that are overlapping between these two networks? That's something that I did forget to mention in the demo. We actually are quantifying influence in a way that goes beyond just the number of followers an account has, based on how much centrality they actually have within a network. So the user will be able to answer those questions much more easily using our chat agent and have it generate reports based on that information. Another really exciting feature that we have, it's ready on our back end, we just need to actually be able to integrate it, is viral narrative prediction. So this is both historical and forward-looking for wargaming, but we've been able to, with between 80 and 85% accuracy, predict narratives that may or may not go viral within a network, which we think is going to be a very powerful tool, really sort of across the board as it relates to the use cases we discussed earlier. One possible use case with that will be wargaming. So we have this network of Kremlin sympathetic accounts. You want to look at a narrative that might counter that of the narrative undermining U.S. financial support for Ukraine. You can ask the chat agent, or you can input into this wargaming module and say, I want this narrative with this sentiment seated in XYZ place. Do we think this is going to be effective? And you can test which narratives and fine tune those options to identify what will be the most effective way to reach your audience and influence them. And then finally, we recognize that social media is inherently multimodal and is increasingly so. If we were to just focus on text going forward, we would be missing a significant portion of the data on platforms, especially on those like TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube. And so we have our model ready to go. Again, just needs to be integrated, that will do speech to text, image to text, describing all of these various videos and other contents to make our platform multimodal, addressing as much of the social media content in the market as possible. So I'll hit pause there.
Terrific, Dan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jason, I think you just got muted.
Oh, here we go. Thanks, Dan. Great overview and presentation. So really appreciate that. So I see we already have quite a few questions in Q&A. So Dan, I'll give you a couple moments to get ahead, because I think quite a few of those are going to be coming. Let me just get my dog out of the way. Give you 1 second. Sorry.
And if you want, Dan, while Jason's doing that, I can start asking the questions and you can answer them. If you want to do it that way, Dan.
Yeah, so I can answer live. So I see Aaron Smith first here with, can you tag and label network members? Also, can you store profiles for network nodes? So one of the features that we have planned in mind is the ability to add or remove network nodes as the user sees fit, as a way to not only just improve the system kind of with human computer interaction, but also impart further knowledge about the network and the domain. Ultimately, the shortest answer is, in true product management fashion, is on the roadmap. But that's something that we do see as incredibly valuable. And then the follow-up is, can you store profiles for network nodes? It's kind of a complicated answer in terms of, technically, yes, there are some restrictions that we have and that we're imposing upon ourselves for GDPR and CCPA purposes. So we want to avoid being out of compliance with anything like that. Second question here, Dr. Palmore. I see your presentation is covering more the macro environment. on the help me understand how does a business or small business owner benefit from your product or service. I'll hit answer live. So it sort of depends on the use case, right? We have built this platform to be as configurable as possible. So at the end of the day, you can create any sort of network that is of interest to you, whether you have a misdis malinformation use case of interest, whether you're trying to identify a new marketing influencer, whether you're trying to identify product trends. We actually use this, we dog food this ourselves to identify trends in AI. So essentially, the only limit on the platform itself is the knowledge that you can bring to it. So again, it kind of just depends on what's of interest to you.
Yeah, if I could add on to that a bit. So especially I would say with business to consumer roles or business to business, really, if you're looking to stay ahead of the commentary around your product and services, understand who the key influences are that are responsive to your marketing messaging, who like your products or perhaps they dislike your products, and be able to conduct that outreach, potentially associate them with your company in a way, but stay ahead of that narrative environment because it moves so quickly. The platform can be configured to do exactly that.
From anonymous attendee, you can model a network where misinformation may be generated. Can you model a network that is prone to certain misinformations or one that is resistant to them? Especially the former, yes. The latter, you'll have to have a little bit more kind of seed knowledge that you bring to it. But essentially what you can do is you can identify a network based on the earliest mentions of certain content. So for example, was it 4 or 5 months ago now, Seymour Hersh published an article alleging that the US was behind the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, right? What you can do is you can take that Substack link and you can use that as your seed and say, I want the first N% of people who mention this. And within that, what you can sort of ascertain is for the non-bot accounts, you can set other criteria that I didn't go into in depth here, but you can set other criteria that essentially would allow you to pick up who the earliest mentions are of this misinformation narrative or any sort of misinformation narrative that you've identified previously. With that, you're then able to assess that network, see who is in it and what other narratives that they're discussing, and potentially even identify ways to sort of counter the narratives that are sort of taking hold within that at-risk population. One of the things that we anticipate being able to do with our chat agent, because it sits on top of the networks itself, it's learning from the language of the network itself. You can say, based on this narrative, or based on this network's previous discussions, previous language, where do you think this narrative is going to go in terms of the actual content? And then take the language of the network, mirror it, but with a counter narrative that would be able to sort of neutralize the malinformation. For Clement Danish, what languages does it evaluate and can it distinguish regional accents and dialogues? Are there any non-Western PAI digital streams that are available? Yes, so we're translating 100+ languages already. That model itself does look at dialogues, so it can assess the difference between Australian English and British English, which is just kind of the two that came to mind. But that would be different dialects of Arabic as well, those types of things. So the short answer is yes. Are there any non-Western PAI digital streams that are available? So in terms of social media data, we have a Weibo profile scraper that we are able to get to. We're still trying to crack the overall kind of search, but we do have profiles. We will have VK, Telegram, which is kind of a non-Western platform. It's used very heavily in Eastern Europe, right? particularly around the Russo-Ukrainian war. And then as we expand into other PAI sources, particularly news, we already are contracted with, I think it's Naviga, to get access to their news feeds, which include global news sources. For Andrew Cox, for video platforms like TikTok and YouTube, does it also take into account text on screen? Yes, is kind of the short answer there. Petra Wilson, as you state, this is a two-way service. How do you ensure privacy of shared data for participants and clients? So essentially, we've built this to be entirely multi-tenant. The effective, or the impact of that is client A has absolutely no access to client B's data, models, networks, anything like that. We ourselves, for commercial clients, will cache data so we don't have to scrape it twice. But that is also something that can be opted out of based on kind of contractual terms. And ultimately, the value is in the analytics, as Jason said. And one of the things that we bring to the table are these customizable models based on our Nebula platform. So customizable sentiment that's contextual to your topic of interest. So you could even have multiple sentiment analysis models, based on the topic, entity extraction, generation models. These are all bespoke to you. That is in no way going anywhere.
Yeah, just a couple of additions related to data architecture. So for government clients, the system is hosted on GovCloud. And then during the collection process, if Dan hasn't mentioned it already, we use numerous proxy servers to collect the data accordingly. So in order to minimize attribution.
I'm going to go out of order here because I see Petra had a follow-up. Plans for Q4 BYOD and GDPR compliance, see the above question. So just following up on that, again, we where GDPR compliance is required, we are in compliance with GDPR. And BYOD, we sort of assume, or we make the assumption that our clients are themselves not going to provide us with data that is out of GDPR compliance. But if it is, we have a robust PII hashing method that will obfuscate any PII that we receive. And we have models that actually identify that for other products. So those are implemented on our services to ensure that we maintain our own compliance. And then finally, for anonymous attendee, while the case about Russian accounts was clearly exposed as organized misinformation, how is fact checking typically made, and how do you identify differences between organized misinfo and viral info shared quickly by a non-connected group of people? This is an interesting question, and it's one that we sort of think about pretty holistically. What we don't want to do is provide users with an overly prescriptive set of rules that, if you don't hit perfectly, will not provide you the information that you need. So what we do is we let the user bring their knowledge to the AI agent and tell it, this is what I see as a viral information campaign versus a viral misinformation campaign. So you can tell the agent, notify me if you find viral misinformation, which I define as, high engagement, negative sentiment, low authenticity, and high virality, versus kind of just overall information being shared. User might say the account age has to be older than the average account age has to be older than 2 years, or something like that. We try not to be in the business of dictating to you what is mis, dis, or malinformation. We just try to provide you the tools that you as an analyst are able to assess those information. For Aaron Smith, is this designed for single scope inquiry with manual process, and nor does it include capability for multi-batch? So our model is based on the number of networks you create. So the one that you just saw, the Pentagon Explosion Network, is one network, but you could easily have, you know, if you were to rename that Kremlin misinformation, you could have that on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, Telegram, yada, you know, all of these various platforms. We ingest all of the data that we collect from there, and we do the multi-batch from through our models that way. But you know, you could have those whatever 5-6 networks I just named, and in the same tenant, if you had a different user, or if you yourself just had a different set of interests that was you know, Okinawa independence disinformation, and you wanted to do another 5 networks versus across the platforms that way, you would be able to do it the same and have that analysis in one spot. Aaron, a follow-up or another follow-up there was, could I have triggers to set an alarm? Yes, is kind of the short answer. There are a couple of ways we have that set up. And then for automated use within a larger system, yes. Again, similar answer there. For Undra, I apologize if I mispronounced that. Under the geolocated posts row on Argus, does it take into account users using VPN to hide their real-time location? So geolocated posts are something that we have on our roadmap. We were a little bit ambitious to put that in the application for beta. Right now, we're still assessing the various methodologies that we are going to try to use for certain clients to be able to assess geolocation. We probably won't launch that feature commercially, but it's going to depend on kind of the user and the user base, their sensitivity to certain items. But to answer your question directly, we're still kind of assessing how that would effectively work. Ultimately, it would be probabilistic based on a number of features, including ad tech data, but also items assessed based on the content that they post. For example, any sort of geolocations that they tag in posts, any places that you can sort of back into based on the images that they're posting. You know, if they're posting pictures from Mykonos and they're not tagging Mykonos, but you see blue and white buildings along a beautiful ocean, right? Probabilistically, with the way that computer vision is going, we're able to assess where places might be. I think that's it. Have a couple of thank yous in the Q&A, but otherwise, I don't see any other questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Maybe a couple more will pop up here in a moment. So, you know, just an anecdote. We were in a conversation the other day with the former commander of SOCOM, and we were talking about particular use cases and the value proposition from like a defense standpoint. And I think you could apply this to a commercial use case as well. And we gave a bit of an old example with him concerning indications of, say, an attack on the US Embassy, like we saw many years ago in Libya. And, you know, the reporting on an event like that may certainly come out on social media even before it's reported, say, on a mass media network channel like CNN. And there would certainly be value for a use case there when, you know, if reporting along those lines comes up to the viewer's question concerning setting up alert notifications. You know, there would certainly be value there, but really the true value of the analytical predictive capability that we're building out in this platform is, in that case, to be able to detect, say, very declining sentiment concerning American presence in Libya, right? Or suggestions of taking violent action against US personnel or locations, including the embassy. Those kind of indications that predict that something, bad is going to occur, a violent event, that's the real advantage that a platform like this is going to provide. So we thought that was a very good use case that we're able to have a conversation with him about. So along those lines, in terms of our development of the platform, we're currently partnered with US Special Operations Command and getting into an arrangement as well with the US Army, and then building out an additional intelligence platform for the US Army as well. So we're seeing a great deal of interest along these lines in open source intelligence, and we see the dual use application of this technology for commercial use cases, like we briefly touched upon as well, is highly relevant. So we're very excited to continue building out these technologies and having further conversations with all of you. And we very much have appreciated your time today. Are there any other comments from the Accrete team that they'd like to make right now?
All good.
Okay, well, very good. Yeah, you can reach out to the email address sales@accrete.ai, or if you'd like to reach out to me directly, you're certainly welcome to do that. Jason.kirby@accrete.ai. So thank you very much. And thanks to Asher and the Deep Tech Showcase team. And we look forward to a future event with you all.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thanks, Asher.